Well, thanks everyone for coming to my presentation today. I have been learning a lot about this topic myself, and I'm very happy to share the things I have learned with you. But before we start, let's see, I have a bit of a confession to make. My name is Gina, and I have a problem. I make really long, unwieldy surveys that no one likes to answer. And since I work on a lot of huge projects that have a lot of moving parts, I need to find out a lot of detailed information. So I've spent a lot of time this year learning how to make my surveys better. And I am still learning, but I would like to share with you some of the things that I've learned so far in case you happen to be in the same boat as me. Just to kind of give you a blueprint of where I'm trying to head today, I put together this really short agenda for a really complicated topic. Um, we're not going to cover all of the things that you can learn about a survey today. There are two main things that I really want to focus on and touch on some other things very briefly. The main things I want to talk about today, I want to start off with just a little bit on when you're going to actually want to use a survey and when something else might work a little better. I'm really going to talk about some tips and tricks on how to build your survey to get the kinds of information that you are actually seeking to find, and to also word your questions so that people know how to answer them with the correct information. I would like to talk a little bit about analyzing the information that you get from the results and how to communicate different pieces of information the most effectively. And that gets really into a lot of kind of nitty gritty information types that I'll try to lay off the mathematics as much as possible. And again, talk about some alternatives to a survey if you are in one of those situations where a survey is not going to get you the best versions of the information that you need to make the decisions you need to make. I've also gathered together some of the resources that I used when I was learning about this in the hopes that they can help you as well. As I mentioned, there may be times when a survey is the absolute best thing to do with the resources that you have available, and there may be times that another method might be a better choice to get you the information you're looking for. The first question you need to ask yourself is, what kind of data do you want to gather? Are you looking for numbers? Are you trying to categorize information? Is there a limited number of possible responses to the questions that you're trying to ask? That is kind of a big giveaway as to whether or not a survey is going to work for you. And do you have a theory that you're trying to verify? Do you think, I think maybe this service might get a lot of use in my community, and you just want to check and see if your assumption is true? Surveys are great for measuring quantitative information like this, and quantitative is, more or less means things like counts, percentages, ranking choices, and if you really want to get into math, standard deviation and things like that. And you might want to try something else in certain circumstances. For example, do you want to ask more open-ended questions and find out how participants feel, or do you want to find out more detail about their experiences? For example, how do patrons use your building or your website or other resources in your facility? Do you want to know a little bit more about what they're thinking, things they may not think to tell you? And this information is considered qualitative, and a survey is not always the best way to gather it. Sometimes it is, especially if you do not have the resources to try other things, but we'll talk about alternative ways to measure this information a little later. What I really want to talk about most today are some tips on building a survey. And there are some steps that you kind of want to follow when you undertake building a survey. Like with any project, you want to plan and prepare in advance. Then you need to define the actual information that you're looking for. I'm going to talk about that a lot shortly. Then you want to build the questions to get you that information. You want to choose the best question type and make sure that the sort of data that it returns can get you the kind of visualization that you need to communicate that response to whoever your audience is, be it administration or the public or just other staff members. Visualization and analyzation are kind of fancy ways to say graphs, charts, different ways to show information to people as quickly and as clearly as possible. The very first thing when you set out to undertake a survey project is sounds easy, but it's not always as clear as it sounds. Decide exactly what you want to know. And one really good recommendation I found in the article that's linked at the bottom of this slide is to write down each answer you want with a blank in the spot of the thing that you want to learn. Once you've completed this, you can use this list of potential responses to build your questions. And then you also want to think about how you plan to summarize and present the results afterwards. Are you sending an email? Are you doing a presentation in front of a big crowd? That might change the way that you frame your questions in order to get the kind of information that is going to present that information the most clearly to your audience. One of the best resources that I found when I was undertaking this project was a book called Using Benchmarking, Needs Assessment, Quality Improvement, Outcome Measurement, and Library Standards by Rosalind Farnham Dudden. And that is kind of a long and unwieldy title, but it is one of the most clear books that I found, one of the kind of most easy books to grasp in starting completely from scratch, especially in terms of a needs assessment. I tried to build a training needs assessment for two of our databases, Learning Express Library and Job and Career Accelerator, earlier this year. And this is a book that I used to kind of help me decide what I wanted to ask and in what format. She gives 3 steps to kind of prepare for your project. And again, we talked about define your purpose or your question. What information do you need to find out? And there are some sub questions here that you should really take some time to think about, especially if this is a larger project that involves more people in your organization than just you. If you're going to share these results with other people who also need to base their work on them, there are some things here about thinking about your team. That's preparation number 2. And the third step is to identify stakeholders and internal and external factors. Maybe people in your community might be able to give you some input on how you can build your survey. Then she kind of moves into actually starting to build the survey itself. Defining the question is something that we're going to talk about in a lot more detail very shortly, but I found this little grid that she put in the book to be extremely useful in just kind of thinking through what you want to find out from a question, who you're going to ask, what kinds of responses you might get, and then how you might present that information after the fact. This is actually from another a book chapter that she cites that I also have later on in the resources list, and highly recommend this particular exercise when you're trying to decide what questions you want to ask. You need to determine the resources available clearly. If you do not have a lot of money and you do not have a big pool of people to draw from, that's really going to affect the kind of survey that you can distribute and the number of people, the number of responses. And some of the recommendations say to actually do multiple surveys to check the results. You have to ask yourself, do you really have the pool of potential respondents to be able to do that? And if so, kind of what is the best way to generate the sort of multiple responses to compare? You want to develop a timeline so that everyone is on board and knows at what point kind of the survey is going to end, and then what the responses and the reactions are going to be. And then once you've built your survey and you know the time frame, you can start to gather the data. And then comes the analysis. You look at the results, you present the results, share them, discuss them, you make a decision based on those results. You report what you found and what you've decided. And if you enact some change as a result of the survey results, you may want to repeat this particular type of survey in the future to see if the need still exists or it has been addressed. I didn't really talk about needs assessment too much. It's kind of a type of survey that kind of does what it says on the tin. It assesses needs in your community for whatever project you're wanting to work on. So again, like I keep saying, defining the questions and analyzing the data are really the the focus of this presentation. And I'm going to get into very nitty-gritty details on how you build a question, how you choose what type of format to ask that question in. Like, do you want to use a multiple choice question or a blank or a slider scale or a big open text box to respond? Those different formats of question change the kind of information that you get and then how you can tabulate it later. And the third point, the ways that you can communicate and visualize different types of results. What the type of question format that you choose really does dictate how you can then present it later. So just some things to think about as you're building your survey. One question you can ask yourself, are you categorizing things? And sort of mathematic, statistical terminology for this kind of information is categorical data, sometimes also called nominal. If you've had a statistics or probability class, some of these terms may sound really familiar. Some examples of this kind of information are political affiliation, gender, type of library material, usually text information. There are a limited number of possible responses usually. There's no inherent order to these items. You could alphabetize book and music CD, but as far as the concept of a book and the concept of a music CD itself, one is not more or less than the other. One does not inherently come before the other. So it's considered categorical. Ways that you can analyze this information, it can provide counts of things that fit into those categories. You can get percentages, and you can create crosstabs, which I'll describe in greater detail later, but crosstabs are kind of a grid that have one category on the top and another category on the side, and you can kind of get subsections of your information. Categorical data cannot answer how many types of questions. It cannot provide averages, and it cannot test correlation if that's something you're trying to do. Question types that are good to answer categorical data questions are yes or no. For example, do you have a library card? You could categorize people into card holders and non-card holders by asking that question. Multiple choice, the sample question here is, where is your home address? You can categorize respondents into which county they live in, or if they prefer not to answer at all. And checkboxes are another question type that you can use that works really well with categorical information. And you're going to see some of these visualizations frequently. Pie chart and bar chart are pretty friendly to categorical. They're actually friendly to a lot of different types of information, but you can definitely use both of these with categorical information. And you can see some sample data here. I just want to warn you, any place where I have used sample data, it's all fake. This is just here for illustrative purposes. I wanted to just kind of give you an example to show you how you can make this information, make the results of your survey visual to your audience. A pie chart will show you kind of the quantity or the percentage, the count or the percentage of something, and bar charts do the same way. You can, if you like, break it down into another category with the separate sections of bar charts, such as academic libraries, public libraries, K through 12, and other. And each color of bar indicates a different category of material. The thing I mentioned earlier called a crosstab is really good if you have kind of a small number of categories. When you start getting into large numbers of categories, this gets a little too unwieldy to visualize, but it allows you to do kind of breakdowns of information by multiple categories, with one category being at the top, this is the type of material, and another category on the left being the type of library, with a totals row on the bottom, and you could do a totals column on the right as well. Again, these are completely made up numbers, but this just gives you an illustration of what this type of data visualization looks like. Another question to ask yourself is, are you ranking things? If you are, then you may be gathering what is called ordinal data. These are categories that have a clear inherent order, such as top 5 destinations, top 5 anything, top 10. There is a number for second, third, fourth, fifth preference. Scales are not numeric, but they also have an inherent order. Best to worst, excellent to unsatisfactory, and the never, rarely, sometimes, always, which is also a movie title now. It's a pretty common survey response. With these, you can analyze the data to provide counts, percentages, and crosstabs, much like categorical data. And also like categorical data, this information cannot provide averages or test correlation. Some types of questions that you can use to gather this information are multiple choice. You can build a scale with little checks or circles that your respondent can click off. You can also use a drop down to sort of present the same options. And ranking is a question type where the user has a number of different options that they can slide around in order of preference. When you do this, it's really important to make it clear what the order numbers actually mean so that your respondent is actually answering the way that they think they are. Again, for visualizations, we have our old friends, the pie chart and the bar chart. Work really well with this type of information. And I didn't make a crosstab, but you could use that here as well. And the next question to ask is, are you gathering numbers? And here's where things start to change a little bit. It depends on what type of numbers you are gathering. Are you gathering dates? Are you rating something? For example, on a scale of 1 to 5. Are you counting something? Are you measuring something like website hits or database sessions, linear feet in your building, etc.? In that case, you may be gathering interval data or ratio data. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between those two, but they're handled very similarly. So unless you're a really big numbers and statistics nerd, it's, I think, not super important to understand the difference. And in some cases, some of the things I read kind of conflicted on what the difference was between the two. But the general descriptions of interval data, it's important to know that there is a distance between values that is meaningful. The data, like ordinal data, has an inherent order, but the distance between those values is usually equal and it has a meaning. Think of days. The difference between dates is always 1 day. The difference from 1 day to another is always 24 hours. The difference between one temperature to another is in degrees, and each degree is like an equal distance apart from other degrees if you're measuring temperature. Unlike ordinal data, these values have a mathematical difference. You cannot subtract sometimes from never, but you can subtract 32 degrees from 75 degrees. Data that falls at the one big difference between interval and ratio data, data that falls under interval data, the interval data category has no absolute 0 or none values. Like, for instance, Celsius has a 0-degree measurement, but it is arbitrary. It just means that that is the point at which water freezes. And the temperatures then go off into the negative scale and they go up. They go both directions from there. And also dates don't really have a 0 value. There is no existing day where there is no date. So that's probably as mathematical as anybody wants to get with this information. But the important thing to know is that types of this information are dates, ranges, IQ scores, certain types of temperature scales, that type of information. And you can use this to get averages, and you can use it to test correlation. Ratio data, on the other hand, is made up of specific numbers and precise measurements. Like, you are measuring height, you are measuring weight, you are counting a number of days, you are counting website hits, database sessions, etc. Ratio data has a 0 or none value. There is a point to the measurement where there is none. For example, sadly, if you had 0 database sessions, that is a possibility. These responses can be represented as fractions. These responses can answer they can answer how many questions, like how many patrons walked in your door this morning. They can provide summary statistics as well. You can get averages from this. If you're really doing some kind of heavy math project, you can do variance and standard deviation, and they can test correlation. And the sort of default way to gather interval data is this thing called a ranking scale, which I'm sure you have seen if you have bought anything online recently. You have probably been emailed often this: how likely are you to come back to our store or tell a friend about our store? And you get this sort of 0 to 10 scale from not at all likely to extremely likely. That is an interval data question type. Another option is the matrix, which has the sort of the same scale repeated multiple times for different items. You can use a text box, especially if you're asking for just a number, like enter the number of unique database users for this month, enter the number of patrons that walked in the door before noon today. Multiple choice as well if you're working with a numeric scale. It's just another way to present the same options to users, depending on what. Hello? Oh, is there a question? Nope. Okay. To visualize this, again, we have our old friends, the bar chart and the pie chart. I kind of shook them around this time and put the bars on the side, but it's just another way to present the same information, or different. It's another way to present a bar chart. Let's see. The new addition to this category is something called a box plot, or what I like much better, a box and whisker plot, because each of these segments you will see. Let me see if I can do a marker. Learned how to do it. I may regret this. Screen pointer options, pen. Okay. When you're looking at a box plot, you'll see a box in this sort of range of numbers, and that is the bulk of information that is in the survey. Most of the respondents fell between these two numbers that the box covers, but you also have these little strands or quote unquote whiskers that come out from the box. And this just lets you know you did have some responses that were in this range, but they're kind of outliers. They're not really the bulk of what people responded. So this gives you a good grasp at a very quick glance of all the possible range of responses you got, but where the most responses are falls into this box area. Okay. That kind of concludes the truly heavy math portion of this presentation, and I am not a mathematician, so I confess I am a little relieved. We are getting more into the language part now. The way that you word your questions and the way that you structure your survey can have a humongous effect on how people respond. Now we know what kinds of information we need. We need to think about how to get people to answer those questions correctly and to actually finish the survey. So again, language is a really big thing, and there are some great recommendations here gathered from a lot of different sources. They all tended to kind of say the same things. A big one is to avoid complicated words and jargon. And in libraries, we have a lot of jargon that, at least I know, I don't always realize, especially coming from the days before, when I was very little, before a lot of the stuff was on computers. And also in grad school, I know what an index is. I've had to go run to the shelf and grab an index off the shelf from like 1930 and look up articles. I used a card catalog, so I know what the word catalog means, and I know what databases mean in this context, but a lot of this terminology may be very confusing to especially new library users who don't have a clue. So it's best to try to watch out for words like that that may not even stand out to you if it's something that you live with every day. It's good to try to have another pair of eyes. You always want to pre-test your survey before you send it. And it's good to have a set of eyes that are not as familiar with the language that you use in libraries to take a look at the survey if at all possible. And sadly, it's really good to avoid humor as well, because that can come off as confusing, especially if the survey has been really serious before that point. Someone may not be sure if you're joking or not, or how to respond to the question. Something that's really difficult to do is to watch out for words with multiple meanings. It may not occur to you that the word or the question could be interpreted differently. You definitely want to keep your questions short and concise, but be careful not to oversimplify too much that it completely loses its meaning. One way that you can keep your questions shorter is to look out for clauses, and you can usually find those by looking for commas. The more commas you have in your sentence, the more likely you are to have added some things in there that you didn't really need. Specificity is also good, not only in getting you better, more specific data, but making it more clear to users what they need to actually say in response to the question. Anytime that you can use numbers and scales instead of adverbs like regularly, that could mean something completely different to me than it does to a patron, anytime you can do that, it is going to improve your results. The more precise the responses, the better your data will be when you get the survey results back. One way you can kind of make things more specific, especially when they do not inherently involve numbers, is to turn very broad questions, especially the kind that start with "Do you like something?" into multiple more precise questions, like "What does it mean to like something?" And some examples that I saw were, "This thing that I'm asking you the question about meets my needs," or "I would recommend it to others." If you have been getting kind of hammered with a lot of those surveys from online vendors lately, maybe take a look at some of the questions that they ask, because some of them are pretty good and can give you some ideas of questions that you can also ask for different projects. This one, this one's really hard. The advice is to avoid leading questions and bias, and it sounds like it should be really obvious. When you look at these two questions, you may get a different response from the same person to these two different questions that are sort of asking the same thing, but not really. For example, should the library cut its ebook budget in order to stay open later? But if you rephrase the question, should the library stay open later so students can study late? One of these sounds better than the other. So when you're pretesting your survey, ask your sort of reviewers to note if any of the questions seem like they have a right or a wrong answer. That's a dead giveaway that you have created a leading question, possibly by accident. Another trick you can use is to take out any adverbs that aren't needed. It may not be clear to you that you've created a leading question, but adverbs often add a little bit of connotation to things that you probably don't intend. And something that is probably the hardest for me is to always allow options for neutral responses, because I always really want people to answer the question that I'm asking, but it will improve the quality of your data very much to offer this option, because people don't always have a strong opinion, or they may not know what you're talking about, or there may be another option that you haven't considered and are not aware of. And if you do not offer something like this, whichever one fits best with the question that you are asking, users may pick an answer that is not accurate, or they may just guess. They may just sort of randomly click something to get through the survey faster. So it's going to skew your data. It really is best to allow for these neutral options. And other, the ever popular other at the bottom with like a blank to sort of explain, is it's a frequent thing that you can use to not only give them an out, but maybe discover something that you didn't even know to ask about. Avoiding double-barreled questions is a big one. You only want to ask one thing per question. And one dead giveaway that you have created one of these by accident is when you find words like "and" or in the middle of your question. For example, do you attend book clubs and Sunday concerts at the library? You may think you're just asking about, do you attend any of the events that we offer, but a reader might look at that and think, well, I attend book clubs, but I don't wake up early enough to attend the Sunday concert. So how do I answer this question? You can solve that problem by either splitting this into two questions, like I've done here at the bottom of the slide, or you can rephrase the question, like, do you attend events at the library? And another thing that was a little bit of a surprise to me is the advice to break yes or no or agree or disagree questions up into interval questions. For example, not at all, somewhat, very, often, etc. Respondents may want to seem agreeable if they don't really have strong feelings about something, and they may just click agree to get past the question. And also, I mean, they seem to want to do it. I'll sure go ahead. I'm fine with that, but they may not really actually want to answer agree. So this is a good way to give them an out, and it also gives you more data that you can work with, which is always a good thing. This one hurts. Um, Avoid using grids or matrices. They can be really intimidating for users to fill out. There's some cases where you really need to use a grid or a matrix. But if you have a survey and your user page is down to just a screen full of little circles, that really needs to be something that they think is important enough to fill out, or it's going to scare them away. They're going to end the survey early. You also want to avoid unbalanced scales, which is something where the user has more negative or positive options than the other. For example, if you have three circles that all say some variant of good, and then only one little circle to click on that is poor, only one negative option, then your data is probably going to be skewed in the positive direction and possibly inaccurately. So I talked a lot about survey fatigue in one way or another, and that's where your respondents just get tired of answering questions and they either quit early, or worse yet, they start just choosing random answers to end it, and they really can mess up your data that way. So a few things that you can do to do that is to avoid survey fatigue is to keep your survey short. One method to do this is to check your questions against that list of blank responses that you made before you even started the survey, and just either eliminate anything that doesn't get you there, or take it out and save it for another survey. You may also, kind of skipping ahead of myself a little bit to this last bullet, you may want to break your survey into multiple surveys. If you just have a whole lot of things that you want to find out and it's just too much for one survey, it may be best to break it up. Ask your easy questions early and save your complex questions for the end to kind of get all the fast ones done quick. So when they start to lose their energy, they don't have as much to go through. Break your survey into multiple pages if your tool allows it, but also avoid having too many pages. And show your survey progress along the way so that they know what's coming and it's not just kind of into infinity. And again, we talked a little bit about things that were not really well suited to surveys. Different kinds of information, usually qualitative data, meaning experiences, emotions, thoughts, or even if you just don't have a hypothesis or a theory to test with a survey and you just want to find out what people think, from which you might later develop a survey, these methods are kind of a good place to start. Um, interviews are really common alternatives to surveys because they allow you to do a very conversational one-on-one question session with someone where you can ask open-ended questions, and they may inspire follow-ups on their responses. It's very spontaneous and you can go in a lot of directions that you may not have originally planned. Focus groups are very similar, except that they involve multiple participants and usually 1 to 2 facilitators. They have the added advantage that they can capture interactions between participants, which may go off on unexpected tangents again, but they do have the disadvantage that respondents may feel uncomfortable answering some questions or discussing some topics in front of others. They may not be completely honest, and you may not get 100% accurate responses to some of your questions. Observation is really neat, especially if you're dealing with any kind of technology. It is what it says. You will observe participants in the situation that you're researching. This is used a lot with library webs or website design in general, especially usability studies. You can also use it in physical situations with library space. As a grad student, I participated in a usability study where we sat next to a participant. We gave them a list of tasks to work through on our new website that we were redesigning. And then we would sit next to them and log the number of clicks it took to get to certain parts of the site and how they went from one part of the site to the other so that we would better understand how they used it and also note where things could be improved. Beyond these three, there are other methods that I list resources a little later on that talk about but a lot of those get into things that are not really pertinent to most of the environments that we are in libraries, or they sort of require a much more academic or much better funded environment to pull off. But if you are interested in learning more about it, there are a lot of resources. And speaking of which, at the end of the slides, I put links to a lot of the resources that I myself used and learned from this year. There are 2 slides of pretty introductory information. The third slide is aimed more at library and information science users. The first is the Susan Berkowitz is not, but the Dudden book I mentioned earlier is a great resource. It has a CD-ROM that has very useful worksheets that you can go through that kind of take you by the hand and walk you through this project, especially if you are doing a massive project. Gives you places to think about and answer some of the questions that we talked about. And we do have that here at the Library Commission. I don't know if you have it where you are or can get it via ILL. I do not think there is an electronic version of it, but I highly recommend this book to anyone who is starting out on a project like this. And the last link here is this Ditch the Survey article from In the Library with the Lead Pipe. It's where I got information on some of the alternatives, and it actually talks about more alternatives to surveys than I did. So that's a really neat place to start if you just want ideas of different things you can do. The Dudden book also has a lot of alternatives in it as well, although it doesn't really present them as alternatives. It's just more, here are other things you might want to do in addition to surveys. And that's the bulk of it. I would like to open it up for questions, but before I do that, I wanted to let everyone know I have a link here. It's a is good shortened link with WVLA 2020 survey building at the end. There is a short survey here on whether or not this presentation helped you. And at the end of that survey, there is a link to the slides. If you miss that link for some reason, or you have any trouble at all, or any questions at all later, you can email me at gina.r.chatten@wv.gov, and I can help you get the slides or help you with your questions. But since you have me here now, does anyone have any questions about any of this? It's very quiet.
If you have a mic, feel free to unmute and ask your questions. If not, I'm monitoring the chat, so feel free to start typing.
Gina,
Yes.
what is your suggestion for a good website to use to survey patrons?
Sorry, your microphone broke up. What is my suggestion for what?
A good website to use?
Oh, tools to use to conduct surveys, right? Google Forms are free so far. We use SurveyMonkey here, and it is not free. It has a lot more options. You can use more question types and do more with analysis. There is a library-specific tool that some of you may be familiar with called Project Outcome. I have not yet used it, and I keep forgetting that it is there as an option. There is a different version of Project Outcome for public libraries and academic libraries. If anyone here has used Project Outcome, I know that we have a course for it on our staff-facing Niche Academy website. I would love to hear about your experiences with it. But those are the 3 tools. There's also Qualtrics, Qualtrics. That is also not free. Does that answer your question, or do you have more, or did I miss it completely?
No, that's absolutely what I needed. Thank you.
You're welcome. Project Outcome is great. Oh, we do have one.
This is Beth from Burnsville.
Yes.
We've been using it almost since Project Outcome come out. It got here about the right time for me because I was getting ready to implement surveys and stuff to try to access what we were doing good, what our public needed. So it came, and to try to transfer from just numbers to stories. It's really good. There's not a lot of personalization that you can do as far as questions, but it's got a very good base for information. we're actually one of the case studies on Project Outcomes website.
Very cool. We also have a comment in the chat. Someone uses Brooke County Public Libraries use it, but only here and there. The lack of being able to personalize it looks like an issue. Is it a tool that has a lot of like a question bank that you can use? Like you can't create your own questions, but you can pull one of the questions. Yeah, it sounds that is kind of a blessing in disguise, because when the questions are pre-made like that, you know that they have been tested, that they are at least theoretically going to get the result that they are built to get. So that's something I didn't talk a lot about. There are options to buy survey questions, or like SurveyMonkey has a question bank that you could draw from as well too, and those are good to use if they remotely work for what you're trying to do. So I have to try Project Outcome. I might use that for my next one just to see how it goes. Thanks to Beth and Brooke County for letting us know how your Project Outcome experience went. Is there anyone else with questions or comments or horror stories about surveys that have gone awry? Suggestions for offering library surveys that reach non-library users. Okay. The fancy word for this is, I think, sample selection. Getting respondents to your survey is an area that I didn't touch on in my presentation, because it was pretty tight as it was. There are different ways to do that. Some of the resources that I listed touch on that. I didn't do a huge amount of research on it yet, because a lot of the surveys that I've done have just been you guys. It's been library directors and library staff so far since I've been here. There are options to buy responses. There are companies that kind of round up people to take surveys and answer polls and things like that. I do not know how good they are, or I'm not vouching for them. I just know that that is an option. I don't even know how much it costs. But that's what that is called, is kind of sample selection. So if you do a search for that, things will come up that will help you. Thank you. Thank you.
And if you want to reach people in your community, you can always reach out to your schools. You reach out to senior centers.
Yes.
If you just want to reach people in the community.
Right. Yeah. If you're working in a in a library, you know your community really better than anyone. Or you may that's another place for a survey as well. You may think you know who your patrons are, but that would be a good opportunity for a survey as well. It's just tell us more about yourself. But more than likely, you know where your community is coming from, and you know kind of who to reach out to get responses. I think the problem sometimes comes in getting the number of responses that really give you enough information. That's at least from a lot of what I've read, especially if you want to do multiple surveys. That's always the hard part. One of the suggestions to kind of test your responses is to send your surveys out to one sample group and then kind of keep other people on hold to send the survey out again to another group, and then compare the percentages and the responses from the two surveys to see if there are any huge discrepancies. Theoretically they should be very similar. So there's a lot of different mathematical magic that you can use to test these things. We have one more question. Supporting the community to establish a bookmobile service. Very good. Well, I hope this will be of great use. Anyone else? So the question is the method to reach to them: mail, email, Facebook, pass it out in front of Walmart, newspaper. Yeah, the method of reaching your your respondents is probably going to change the kind of responses you get, I would think, because you're going to get different people groups with each of the different methods, because people who are coming in and out of Walmart may not be the same people who read the newspaper or respond to surveys through their email. So that's an interesting thing to keep into consideration as well. You may, when you're gathering your data, definitely add like a category of where the survey response came from. Like, did this come from passing something out in front of Walmart, or did this come from picking up the phone and calling someone, or did someone respond by email? So that could be something interesting to look at too, and it might tell you more about your community that you did not know beforehand. Do I feel like doing a paper survey in the library as well as online would be beneficial? I think so. Like, yeah, like that's just another way that you're going to reach people who are different than the people you would reach if you do a survey over email or online. If you have the resources to do that and to count up the results, I don't see how it could hurt. I'm sure every time I say something like that, though, it's when you get into, at least the more I read about like statistics and surveys and polling, somebody always has a very different, opposite, and very passionate opinion to the contrary of what the person you just read said. So I'm sure if you did a Google search, you might find people who very angrily defended the opposite, that you shouldn't do multiple types, or you shouldn't get as many people as possible. So that's a consideration too. But I think it would be a good thing to do.